Jake, would you like to go ahead and start recording? It looks like we just did,
Yep,
right?
we're
Okay,
good. Yep, we're good.
perfect. Hello, everyone. Tonight we're talking about finding the sources you need. My name is Evangeline. I am the Instructional Services Librarian here at AU, and we are also joined tonight by, well, why don't you introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Jake. I'm one of the informational services librarian here at AU, and I'm happy to be here. Excited to go through this with you guys.
So Jake will be helping us answer questions in the chat and everything else. So let's jump right in to talking about how you find the information you need. My computer behaves with me. Having this information and learning this will help you do faster and better research for your assignments. I know we all want to find the information we need, and we want to do it efficiently, and this will help you do that. Today, we're going to start by talking about academic articles because that's often what we're looking for. Then we're going to talk about searching in library databases, what that looks like, what the different things mean, how to use it. We're going to talk about evaluating sources, and then we're going to talk about searching on the web. So let's jump right in by talking about what an academic article is. I know a lot of you are familiar with this, but I like to use it as an introduction because when we're searching, it's really important to know what we're looking for in order to know whether we've found it. So for example, here we have "Don't Call Skateboarding at 50 a Midlife Crisis." It is not an academic article, but it does talk about some research that was conducted. It gives you about a 300-word summary of research that shows it's actually good and useful for middle-aged men to skateboard together. And it ends with the phrase, "Skate on, dads." It's from The Cut, which is part of New York Magazine. It's very different from the actual research that was done. This is the actual scholarly article. "Beyond the Youth Culture, Understanding Middle-Aged Skateboarders Through Temporal Capital" was published in the International Review for the Sociology of Sport, which is an academic journal. You can probably tell from the sound of it. You can tell as well because it's marked as peer-reviewed, and because if you were to look it up, you would see confirmation that this is in fact an academic article or an academic journal that peer reviews its materials before they're published. The language here is really formal. In fact, potentially a little bit difficult for us to understand if we're not familiar with it, which means that people are speaking from one expert to another, using the language and jargon that you'd expect there. If we open this article up, we would see an abstract, which gives us a summary of what that article is about, as well as in the about 20 pages, quite a bit longer than the 300 words we were just talking about. We'll also see a methodology, how they did this research in detail. And that type of information is really useful to us and really sets it apart from a lot of the summaries we might find on popular news sources. You'll also see citations and references. They'll tell us about the other research that's been done and allow us to continue learning by reading that ourselves. Peer-reviewed is something I'm sure you're familiar with. Peer-reviewed is a specific and rigorous process that materials go through before being published in academic journals. It makes sure that the information is of high quality and that the findings are supported by the evidence they create or collect. So this is sort of a gold standard for information, but it does not mean that one peer-reviewed article can't disagree with another. That's part of the larger academic conversation or scholarly conversation. When you're looking at academic articles, it can often be pretty intense. There's often about 20 or more pages of really dense information using those big words and that jargon we may not be familiar with. And so understanding common headings to help you navigate that is really useful, especially if you are looking at a social science or a science paper, which is where you'd usually see these types of headings. The abstract we talked about is really useful because you don't necessarily need to read the whole article to know if it's a good fit for you. But then you can skim the introduction. You can get into a literature review where you learn about who else is doing research on this topic, kind of get context for the information you're learning, and you'll often find really great citations here for further reading. Then you'll get into that methodology. Finally, things like results. and a discussion or analysis. What does that mean? What are the takeaways? And a conclusion where we talk about applying that usually. So when it comes to reading, understanding these headings helps us navigate that information to see whether we've found something that's useful for us. So I want to jump into searching in library databases, but if you have any questions about academic articles, please feel free to drop them in the chat. So we're all here tonight to talk about searching. The library database is a really wonderful place to find a lot of things, but especially academic articles, because they are often behind paywalls or otherwise inaccessible to us. So the library makes them accessible by paying for them, by making them all available in one place. And so it's really important thing to do when you're searching, to start at your access point, which in this case is the Phillips Library. You can also find newspaper articles, books, and so much more that again, might not be accessible or might be behind a paywall if you didn't search through us. On our homepage, we have something known as Spartan Search, which is this big blue box that says everything on the left. That lets you search across pretty much everything, which is, a good place to start. But if you want to search in a specific database that's relevant to your area, you can choose A to Z databases. There's a link underneath there that allows you to look at all of our individual databases and sort by subject. So you can see, for example, databases that are specifically relevant to social work or English or whatnot. A lot of people are very comfortable with EBSCO, which is one company that one vendor that we work with. So they offer a lot of articles, but not all the articles that we own, not all of the resources we own. So if you were to use EBSCO search, which like I said is really popular, you would end up searching just a segment of what we have to offer instead of searching everything. If you are going to be searching in an individual database, I think it's good to start in a subject-specific database because then you might have specific tools or filters that are useful for your area, or go and search across everything in Spartan Search. I don't find that it's very useful to search in just EBSCO search because you're not getting everything, but you're also not getting the benefits of a subject-specific search. So how do you get around to searching? Well, I really want you to use the advanced search when you're searching. If you hit that magnifying glass that's on the right of this search box, it opens up a full screen and then you can choose the advanced search button. This opens up a screen that looks a bit like this, and this can be a bit intimidating for people. So we're going to talk through what it means. But the reason why this is really important is because searching in a library database is very different from searching on Google. If you searched on Google and you wanted to know how music therapy helps people with anxiety, you might type in that exact question. Whereas on this type of database, or really even on Google, what you want to do is get rid of filler words. You don't want to have words like how or helps. Those are not words the database can understand because it doesn't understand the syntax or the way that they're related to each other unless we explain it to the database. So here we're allowed to break down our question into its most essential parts. And so we could put on one line music therapy and anxiety. This and is the default, and it's really useful in most situations. But sometimes you want to communicate a different type of relationship to the database, or allows us to say that words are related or similar, and we would take either of them. This is useful because the database is only going to look for the exact word we put in. So that means that if we put in child, it's not looking for the word children. So this is a really useful tool to help us broaden the number of search results we get. Not is useful because it helps get rid of things that aren't relevant to us. So for example, if we search and we're getting a lot of results related to Taiwan, and what we're really interested in are articles about America. If we were to add a line and say, and America, say music therapy and anxiety and America, that might not actually get us what we want because not every article about America has the word America in it or is tagged in that way. So instead, saying not and taking out the thing that's not relevant to us can be really successful sometimes. This kind of gives you a picture of what that looks like. It's basically about the overlap between those words. Most of the time, we're looking for both of the things. In this case, we talked about music therapy and anxiety. An article that talks about both will probably talk about their relationship and whether it does, in fact, help someone. You can also choose where the database is searching. The default is any field, which means it's just looking for that word somewhere, but you can also choose to specify where it's found. And in particular, the subject field is really useful. We're going to talk a little bit more about how to take advantage of that, but imagine it this way. If an article just mentions, say, music, it's not necessarily about music unless it is labeled as a subject. So sometimes you want articles about something. You can also limit the date or year. This is useful if you need articles from, say, the last 10 years, the last 5 years. Put in a start year of 2012 or 2017. And you can add more lines. Your question isn't always just 2 lines, but just be careful. The more things you're asking the database to find in one resource, the fewer results you'll get. Sometimes you need to scale back if you have too many lines. So once you hit search, you can filter your search results. On the left side of your search results is where you see that refine your results options. And most often you're going to be looking for academic articles, so you can filter by peer-reviewed journals. Right off the bat, you're going to find those academic articles. Every once in a while, you'll find something that is a letter to the editor or something else published in a journal that is peer-reviewed. That is clearly not an academic article, but I would say 98% of the time you will find exactly what you're looking for. There's also the resource type option there, which allows you to see different types of resources. So books, newspaper articles, videos, whatnot, you can specify. There's also a subject dropdown, which allows you to specify, or basically to see what is in your results. So if you have 13,000 results, there might be 30 that are specifically about children, or there might be 50 that are specific to psychology versus, say, 20 that are related to social work. So you can use that to help you get a little bit narrower in your search. Once you apply the filters, you can use the little lock icon to lock them in place, which I highly recommend because searching isn't really a one and done thing. Usually you have to try something and then see what works and try again. Remember I said that the database looks for exactly what you say? Well, this is true unless you put quotation marks around something in the sense that it's going to look for the words separately unless you tell it that they're supposed to be found together. So in this case, we have United States, chocolate milk, mental health. All of these are concepts that are actually multiple words that we think of as one concept. Putting quotation marks around it will tell the database to find those words together. Another trick is the wildcard. That's just an asterisk that you put at the beginning of the end of a word. This helps you find different versions of a word without having to actually specify all of them. It can sometimes give you things that you don't expect. So for example, Latin with the asterisk is a great way to find information about Latin American people or Latino people, but it's also a great way to find information about the word Latin, like Rome. So you will, you have to be careful with these, but this is a really, really wonderful tool. So I want to pause here and see if there's any questions, especially in relation to the interface. All right, please feel free to drop questions in the chat if you do have a question, and or to speak up at the end of each section. I really do want to answer your questions and make sure you feel confident about this. Right now, I will plow ahead. I want to talk about the search process. This person has a map, but because this is not something that's necessarily an immediate, obvious solution, actually, there's a little bit more to it than we might think. It's a process. The first part is defining what your question or topic really is. Often we think we know our question, but we need to spend a little bit of time with it to make sure we know exactly what we're thinking about. Then we need to think about what terms we're going to be using. What are our search terms? And then we need to think about the type of information we're looking for. If we're looking for a peer-reviewed academic article from the last 5 years, that's a very specific set of criteria. And it's very different from, say, demographic information, like demographic data, or an official government report. Based on what we're looking for, we then have to decide where to search. And then we need to actually do that search. So there's quite a few steps that happen before we start searching. Once we search, we can review those results, see how they look. We want to save those correctly, which is something that unfortunately people sometimes slip and don't use the right saving tool, and then they have to start their research over because they didn't save what they found. And then you can use a couple tools to help you improve your search based on what you found. One of those is taking the subject terms from the articles that you found. We'll look at exactly what that means in a moment. And follow the references, follow that scholarly conversation to find more relevant information. The last step, as I said before, is to just try it again, try something new. Searching is really something where you try, see what works, and try again. And at any step along the way, if you're having trouble, if you're stuck, if you're confused, you should please ask for help. Librarians are more than happy to help. And we're going to talk at the end about all the different ways that you can get help. So let's walk through an example of a search. How do students with high test scores do in college? Let's say that's our question. You might notice right off the bat, do is really broad. Am I talking about someone's mental health, their social life, how they're doing in athletics, how they're performing academically? I don't really know exactly necessarily. So once I've made up my mind about what I'm really looking for, and maybe it's a combination of all of these, then I can specify that. And I realized what I really meant was how someone is performing academically. Oops. Woo. Oh my gosh, sorry, the wind blew my door closed. Maybe you didn't hear that, but it scared me. All right. So once I realized what I'm really doing here is looking for how someone's performing academically, you can see my question is a lot more specific. I can take the words from my question to get some initial concepts. I have test scores, academic performance, college. If an article mentions all of these things, it'll probably be relevant. You noticed I strike out high because we aren't necessarily looking for articles about high test scores, really. What we're looking for is research about the correlation between test scores and academic performance in college. We may find that actually there isn't one, or that low test scores mean high grades, right? We don't really know. What we're looking for is, what is that connection? Here's where we start brainstorming. And I think about this as creating a word bank for myself. So I start with my initial words: academic performance, college, test scores. From there, I try to think about alternative words. So what that means is it could be a synonym, like a word that means roughly the same thing, or just a word that's related. I can also think about narrower examples. So for example, with test scores, I could search for the ACT, right? A specific type of test instead of tests more broadly. And I can also think about broader categories. So for example, college, a broad category would be post-secondary education. It's also a very official or formal word, which is good because that's probably the language that's going to be used in an academic article. I guess I should specify, we'll get to it in a minute, but I'm looking for a peer-reviewed academic article in this case. We can also think about things that might be measurable. So academic performance, one way we could search for that would be grade point average, right? That's a measurable thing. And so it's more likely to be in research. So you can see how my initial keywords, my initial search terms have sort of multiplied. And I'm sure we could find more, and in fact, will find more as we start searching. If you don't initially have an idea of what things can be, what alternatives there are, that's totally fine. You can just search it up, look up the word on Google, see what types of words are coming up. You don't necessarily have to pull all of this out of your own head. Now, the type of information, I'm thinking peer-reviewed research articles. And since tests have changed, I don't want them to be too old. So I said last 10 years, pretty generous. Now, in terms of where to search, since I'm looking for those academic research articles, I'm going to search in a library database, and I'm going to use Spartan Search to find the most results possible. How am I going to go about searching here? Well, here's an example search. You can see I had a lot of phrases, so I used quotation marks, standardized tests in quotation marks, because I don't want to find the word standardized and tests, and they're both in the same article, right? I want to find the phrase standardized tests. So I have standardized tests and college admissions and grade point average. I reviewed the results. In this case, I found something I'm pretty interested in, and I want to take a closer look at it. I click on the article, I scroll down, and I can find the abstract and make sure that the summary seems like it is in fact going to be useful for me. Let's say I do in fact like it. I need to save this article. Now, I just highlighted a permalink. This is really important because if you save the web address, like the URL at the top of the screen, in most library databases, that's not going to be successful. So it's really important to click that permalink option if you want to link. Save that version, which is a permanent link. It'll always take you back. You can also email it to yourself, etc. In Spartan Search, to view the full text, you have to look under View Online and see there's usually one or more options there. So you'd click through to this additional database. In this case, it looks like it's one owned by the company EBSCO, and that's where you can see the full text. There will be tools to save the article there as well, usually on the right-hand side or up at the top. And you're welcome to save it from there or download the PDF, whatever works well for you, but you just don't want to save the URL or bookmark the page. That's really just unlikely to be successful, and I don't want you to lose your research. Now, while you are scrolling down that page and you looked at the abstract and you're saving your article, you're also going to see these subject terms. And you see I have my little thief friend here because this is one time in life where it's okay to steal things. We want to steal these subject terms if they seem relevant to us. So for example, academic achievement. That's a phrase that I had thought of already, but if I use it as a subject in my little field, I drop down and I choose the field subject. I want to search for it as a subject, then I'm more likely to find really good articles that are about that topic. But I also might learn different phrasing like entrance examinations or student admission criteria. What's important here is to use it exactly as it is written or spelled. Occasionally, when you're looking at access, you'll run into something like this. That just means we don't own the article right away, but we can request it for you. We are more than happy to ask another library to help us. Through interlibrary loan, they can lend us a copy of the article. You'll get it in your email for free, and you can get what you need. It does take a little bit of time because we're asking somebody for help, so it can be 1 to 2 business days depending. I should specify that up at the top there, it says AU Spartan Search, check availability. If you see that, especially if you're in, say, an EBSCO database or a different database than Spartan Search, it likely means that there's like a 50% chance we actually own the full article somewhere else. So if you click it, there's about a 50% chance you'll get taken immediately to the article and not have to request it. So I say always go ahead and click that link if you find something you're interested in. Please do not buy any articles. They're very expensive, and we are more than happy to help you find it. Please just ask a librarian if you're having any trouble. Now, remember we talked about the next step in this process is using the tools that are there. In this case, this is a tool that helps us look at the references on an article. So you see there's an arrow pointing down cited in this. It basically lets you see a full linked list of the references of an article. This is a super useful way to find more articles quickly. You can do this manually, but this makes it fast. You'll also see there's arrows pointing up, citing this. This is our little crystal ball. It lets us look into the future. So let's say that we found an article and it's a little on the old side. Let's say it's from 2000. If we see the articles that have cited that article in the future, say an article from 2019, we can often find the continuation of that conversation. And it's a really, really useful tool. You won't see this on every single article, but you'll see it on many of them when you're in Spartan Search. Can look like this as well. So now we get to the part where we adjust our search and we try again. I've written down some subject terms and I've decided to try one of them. In this case, I decided to use standardized tests, and then I changed the middle term to say college instead of college admissions because my third term is student admission criteria. And that's a subject. You see that I learned this from my searching and I made it a subject on the left. So I want to take a pause. Does anyone have any questions about this search process, how we adjust, and how we approach this? I'm thinking I will go ahead and give us a quick little example then. Let me share this screen. So let's do an example search. Does anyone have something they'd like me to try to search? I'm going to go ahead and go to my Okta homepage, which has a link to Phillips Library. This is one easy way to get to our website. And it takes you to this page, which you can see includes our A to Z database list. So you could sort by subject. Let's say you're looking for history, and you'd see our recommended databases. But you still have this big, great search box here. I'll hit that magnifying glass. And then we have the full screen here. I'm going to open up advanced search. Any suggestions for what to search? You can speak up or type it in the chat. If not, I might just go for music therapy and anxiety, since that was my question from earlier. Oops. I wanted to make it a little bigger, but I think I made it too big. It was acting a little funny, so I just gave it a quick refresh. If it ever looks like this, you can just use the search criteria drop down here to open it back up. Music therapy and anxiety. Let's say I want it to be from the last 10 years. I can go ahead and hit search. I have 1,700 results. If I'm looking for an academic article, I can limit to peer-reviewed journals on the left. This seems really interesting right off the bat. Let me click in. It gives me some more information here. This would be what I would click to view the full text. If I scroll down, I see these subjects. These are kind of interesting to me, but none of them are particularly jumping out at me other than the fact that music therapy is a subject. And then my description here is my abstract. So this would give me a sense of whether this is a useful article for me. But already I could actually go back and improve my search by making this a subject. And now I did not lock my peer-reviewed journals into place, so I have to apply that filter again. I could lock it into place now with remember filters. All right, well, let me go ahead and share the PowerPoint again, and we'll keep going unless people have more questions or have a question. So I know that not everything that you need to find is on a library database or in a library database, and that's where the rest of the great internet comes in, right? And the thing about the internet is that we can find a lot of different types of information on there. So we really have to do some sorting and sifting at a higher level than we do in a library database where everything's already been a little bit evaluated, and because we've been purchasing it or making the choice to add it to our database. So when we're encountering things online, we need to ask some questions and look a little closer. The CRAP test for evaluating sources helps us do that. It asks some questions that we can use to look closer. So there's currency. When was this article published, or when was this source published? If it's old, it might be out of date or incomplete. Relevance. Is this useful for your topic? Is it going to actually help you complete your assignment or whatever purpose you have? And overall, does it seem appropriate for your information needs? So is it going to be appropriate for an academic audience? Authority is a really important one. Who published this information? Is it a source that other people trust? And who wrote it? What are their credentials? When we're talking about academic articles, we're often looking for someone who has experience, more importantly, probably degrees or potentially a professorship in the field that they're writing about. In other areas, we look for different types of authority, different types of criteria. Accuracy is another really essential one. When someone's explaining something to you, do they give you their sources? Do they tell you the evidence for what they're offering? Sometimes that looks like a formal citation. Sometimes it's informal. Sometimes I say, I learned this from Stanford. I learned this from a research article from Stanford. And sometimes I'll give that to you in APA format. Both of those are very useful. One is just more formal and more specific. This is also where we think about whether we can verify that information somewhere else. So for example, when the Queen died, this was not the first time it had been reported that the Queen passed away, but we knew that it was really happening because lots of major, well-trusted, well-established sources were publishing the information. All of them were publishing the same thing. And we also think about whether information was reviewed before it was published. So for example, if a trusted news source published that the Queen had passed away, it's likely that they had a professional fact checker confirming that information before it was published, which is very different from, say, someone's blog. And there's also, of course, the gold standard, like a peer review process that you see in an academic article. The last thing we consider is the purpose. Why was this information created? Are they trying to sell us something? Are they trying to make us laugh? And then we think about whether there is perhaps some bias or whether this is actually an opinion-based article rather than a fact-based or informational-based article. So it can be a little tricky, but these are all really important questions to ask ourselves. Let's take a look at one. We want to think about what the purpose is of this bill. The climate bill allocates $3 billion to paint snowy peaks onto mountains. I'll give you a second to take a look here. The title itself could very well be real. But when we look at this photo, we notice it's a little bit silly. The big helicopters with paintbrushes, probably photoshopped. It doesn't seem like that would really be the way to go about it. And the most important thing we can do is look at the source. In this case, the source is The Onion. If you know The Onion, then you probably can stop right there and say, okay, this is a satire article. This is for entertainment. It's got a little underpinning of opinion. But if you don't know this source, you'd want to look it up and see what exactly The Onion is. So the purpose of this article was to make us laugh. Little underpinning of commentary. This one is a little trickier. Inflation catches the Pentagon flat-footed. By using rosy assumptions about prices, officials have ended up hurting both readiness and troops. The first paragraph tells us about problems with inflation and soldiers and their families having trouble affording basic things. The last paragraph says, having already added more money to the defense budget than President Biden requested, Congress will have to appropriate even more to save America's troops from the Defense Department's negligence. It's the only way to get troops and their families the financial lifeline they need. So this one is a little bit less obvious what the purpose is. We probably learned something new. I learned the idea that inflation is impacting troops and that this is a problem. But if you are paying attention to that last paragraph, you might pick up on the fact that this is in fact an opinion article. This article is labeled in that way, and I cropped it out because we can usually tell from the actual article itself. And not everything is well labeled, or we may even miss the label if it is labeled. So this one, I had a few red flags from the beginning. The language of the title is already a little bit colorful. And that doesn't mean that it's opinion-based, but it had me paying closer attention. Inflation catches the Pentagon flat-footed, using rosy assumptions. These are somewhat judgmental, very colorful language. But when I really knew for sure that this was an opinion-based article was in this last paragraph, where they say the only way to solve this problem is the idea that they suggest. In a fact-based article, this would be presented as one solution, and they might quote one of the authors here. John Ferrari is a former US general. They might quote him saying why he thinks it's a good idea, because that would be his opinion. And he has some expertise, some experience to back up that opinion, but it is not certainly the only potential solution. I don't personally know much about this topic, so I don't know that I could tell you another solution, but I think we can all understand in most situations, there's more than one solution. So this is an opinion-based article, and we have to be very cautious of using things like this as sources when we're looking for facts. The other thing we need to do when we are looking at a source is see what other people are saying about it. And I mentioned this with the Onion or with the idea of the Queen dying, where we need to see if other people are also saying the same thing. And part of that is basically opening new tabs on your computer. You can see I have a photograph or a little screenshot of a bunch of different tabs. Part of it starts with looking beyond the exact page you're on. So look at the about page of this website. Look at the front page, the home page. See kind of what you are, what this website or what this organization claims to be about. Often this is very informative, but where you really get the good information is when you search for that article or for what their claim is on another website or on Google in general. So if we were to Google the idea of, say, The Onion, we would quickly learn that it's a satire organization, that it's not meant to be taken as factual. But if we were to Google another type of website, we might learn that it's, say, owned by a very specific political faction, and they have really specific viewpoint on things. Places we can look for sources for this type of information can be as simple as Wikipedia. Usually this gives us a pretty good basic understanding of what type of source we're looking at, but we can also look for articles from credible news sources talking about this source. What types of things are being said about this source? We can also look at fact-checking websites, which are a really wonderful resource to kind of tell us whether this information that's being shared is generally positive or maybe generally quite biased or, in fact, completely inaccurate. And then you can also look to validate the actual information you're finding. So the idea that the Queen is dead, let's search that up in a new tab and see who else is reporting that. Can we verify that somewhere else? And the same can certainly be said for other types of information you find. Fact-checking, like I mentioned before, is really useful for your whole life, frankly, especially as viral social media news stories can tend to be completely inaccurate. There's a lot of sources out there, including PolitiFact, Snopes, factcheck.org, and these are a really wonderful tool for you. I want to pause and see if there's any questions. I don't see any. Like I said, please feel free to ask questions in the chat. Now, when we're talking about online resources, I'm sure you're like, okay, well, what is a good resource? And part of it is that we talked about before with the CRAP test. Why do we trust this source? Well, why are they an authority on the topic? And who's writing it? Do they have expertise on this topic? And what's the accuracy of this information? One thing we can look for is, when it comes to online sources, is the domain name. So the ending of the website, .gov, .edu. A lot of those stand for government-owned website or a educational institution. A lot of people think that a .org is a really great source, and this is kind of a misnomer. A .org is equally good and bad as a .com, really, because like the New York Times, Britannica, like the encyclopedia, those are both .com resources that are excellent. And similarly, there are plenty of .org resources that have very specific perspectives and goals, because often they are organizations with a particular set of values and viewpoint. So it's really important to be cautious with .orgs and not necessarily immediately assume that they're good. But when it comes to searching online, part of what you're looking for is who might know this information. You don't necessarily need to search the whole web. You might be able to find who is a good source for this information. So for example, if you want original research about the LGBTQ+ people in America, the Human Rights Campaign might be a great place to start. If you're looking for information about the bills and laws in Illinois, the Illinois General Assembly website, that's where you want to go. They're going to have what you need. These are a few really, really highly credible sources that are used by a lot of different students for a lot of different information needs. One is the Census Bureau, which gives you demographic information about America as a whole, as well as individual locations. There's also the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics, which is workforce information. And the Associated Press is a really great source for news and other types of breaking information. When you're searching on Google, there's a couple tips. I know we talked about the types of domain names. If you search in Google cite::.gov, no space, and then you add the thing you're searching for, let's say prison reform, you will only get search results relevant to your topic from websites that end in .gov. And this is an extremely useful search tip for quite a lot of different things. You can also use the cite::tip to search an individual website. So cite::aurora.edu, and then whatever you're looking for, we'll see if Google can find something that the search engine in an individual website couldn't find for you. Another trick is related: and a website. This is really good for finding other ideas. So let's say you knew that CDC might be somebody who has some information about a topic you're interested in. If you use related::cdc.gov, you're going to be presented with related websites that probably also have some information that's useful to you. Now, Google Scholar is honestly a place that I don't recommend students search, just because you are likely to encounter a lot of things that aren't available to you, which can be frustrating. But I know a lot of students like it, and if you are ever searching on it, I want to make sure you know that on the right side is where you'll find links if the article is available freely, or if they believe that we have it at AU. Those are right like 75% of the time. But remember, if you're trying to access something, please come ask a librarian. We can probably help you get it. I'm going to jump right into citation managers, but like I said, I really do want to hear any questions you might have. The last thing I wanted to talk about were these tools known as citation managers, which allow you to search for, or I'm sorry, to save and organize your information. There's an app that helps you do this. And we have a entire guide about it, libguides.aurora.edu/citation managers, to help you learn what they can do, decide which one you might want, and download it onto your computer. It works in your browser, it works in your Microsoft Word, and it helps you create your citations as well as save and track your research. This is really useful if you are wanting to keep track of things so you can come back to them later. So for example, 2 semesters from now, when you want to see the article that you'd used before, as well as just for creating your bibliography if you're working on a research project. Now, the library is a really wonderful resource. As you can imagine, librarians are expert searchers. We're really good at this. And if you have specific research you're working on, we would love to help you with that. So we are an amazing resource for you. We also have a physical space. You can study alone or in groups. We have a quiet floor upstairs, and we also have study rooms that you can reserve to work in. We have our online databases. We have all of kinds of digital resources there, as well as books at the library. And we have interlibrary loans so that you can access even more. Anything that we don't own, we can almost always get for you from someone else. How do you get help? Because you certainly don't know how to do everything from today's session, but I hope you feel a little bit better prepared. If you are on our library homepage, you can hit that chat button and you can live chat with a librarian many hours of the day, anytime the library is open. So we can help you see, is this article primary research? How do I access this article? Why can't I find what I'm looking for? We are there to help. You can also click the help button on the library homepage to submit a question and get a response via email. This is great if we're closed or offline, or if you don't have time to sit on chat. Just make sure to give us enough detail that we can help you. When you click that help button, you'll also see frequently asked questions, as well as a list of tutorials. All of these are really useful, and I highly recommend taking advantage of it. There's also that research button, which takes you to a list of our research guides, and we have research guides, lots of different subject areas and individual classes. So these give you resources we recommend, search tips, really just a lot of information that can be very useful to you. You can also make appointments to work with a librarian one-on-one over Zoom or in person. Those are done through Academic Support Net, which is the same place you'd make an appointment if you wanted to work with a writing tutor or something like that. So that can be done through Academic Support Net, which you can find on Okta, or it's also linked a little lower on our homepage. If you were to come into the library, we have upcoming December 6th. We have therapy dogs visiting the library, and on Mondays, we ask people to help us find Sammy Spartan, who has gotten lost while looking for something in the library, and there is a prize. Let me check the chat to see if we have any questions. Nope. All right. Well, I want to review what we talked about today, and then I might go do one last example because we have a few minutes left. Today we talked about searching and how it's kind of a process, right? We need to think about what we can put into our search box, and we need to have options because what we try first might not work. So we can adjust our search and try from there something else. Using advanced search is going to help us be most efficient, most accurate, communicate to the database exactly what we're looking for. And another way we can do that is by borrowing the database language, like those subject terms or other language that we see in articles. Borrowing the language that academics in a certain field are using is going to be very successful for us. Scholarly articles, those academic articles, are peer-reviewed, and as we talked about at the beginning, have certain identifying characteristics. They're usually found in a library database, along with other good high-quality sources. But at any point, whether it's in a library database or otherwise, it's really important to take a close look at our source and make sure that it's of good quality. We can ask ourselves questions about things like the authority and the accuracy and the purpose of our source. So I'm going to just go ahead and do one quick example of searching on the web. Does anyone have any topic they would like for me to search up? Well, let me try something that someone gave me recently. Someone recently said that they wanted to find, oh, did I have something in the chat? Oh, abortion. Okay. But what about abortion? If we just search for abortion, we're going to get quite a lot of different topics, I think, or quite a lot of different material. Hmm. All right, well, I might have to make up my own specification. Pros, cons. Okay, Roe v. Wade overturn. Okay, so this is an interesting one. When we're looking at things like pros and cons, often what we are looking at is opinions, but we can also be looking at it from a more specific example or more specific perspective. So for example, we might want to think about what types of things we might think would be a pro or a con. So for example, some of the hot topics we might be looking for would be things related to ethics, as well as things related to women's healthcare. And so what we could do would be search for those specific topics. It looks like you mentioned Roe v. Wade. So let's look up. Unfortunately, this is pretty broad. Roe v. Wade. Unfortunately, this is a bit too broad for me to really be successful at showing you how this works. Let's just look at an example of this article to practice lateral reading for right now. But I will mention actually that pros and cons are available from a very specific library database. If you are on this list of the A to Z databases and you sort by English, for example, or if you sort by newspapers and current events, you'll see we have CQ Researcher as well as Issues and Controversies on File. These are both really good ways to learn more about current events and hot topic issues, and they include basic pro-con lists that can be used to help spur your research. So let's look at, for example, this article. I'm going to click this because it's related specifically to Illinois and because I don't know this source. So one thing we're learning pretty quickly is this is an opinion-based article. But let's pretend that this isn't an opinion-based article and I want to learn more about this website. I'm going to open a new tab and I'm going to search for Shaw Local. I'll get their website, which is perfectly fine. But what I really want to see is if someone else has written about this. Interesting. The fact that there's only 3 tabs here and that no one else seems to have really written about this topic makes me think this is probably not a well-established source. It looks like the only people really talking, oh, there's more now. There was only 3 a minute ago. It seems like the only people really talking about this source is the source itself, which doesn't necessarily mean it's bad, but it makes me feel like this is probably not a good enough source for my purposes. And in general, I could do better. So I would want to keep looking, even if, let's say, this is the perfect article for my purposes. All right, I want to thank everyone for coming tonight. And let's go ahead and turn off the recording, and then I'll take any further questions that you might have.